They accused me of being a thief just because I drank from my own well. Sounds ridiculous, right? But it stopped being funny the moment 3 HOA trucks rolled into my driveway, workers hopping out with shovels and metal detectors, swearing they were about to uncover stolen pipes. I couldn't help but think, what stolen pipes? My entire setup was designed specifically to avoid relying on theirs in the first place. Yet suddenly, the whole neighborhood looked at me like I'd been sneaking into their kitchens and siphoning off water for years. I'd seen plenty of tales from Drama Nest about power-hungry hoes, but experiencing it firsthand was something else entirely. Honestly, tell me, would you have kept calm if it were you? I was on my deck that Tuesday morning, sipping orange juice made with my well's clean filtered water, when I saw a process server walking up the gravel path. My home sits about 300 years outside any HOA's authority, so I wasn't expecting this at all. The guy looked almost embarrassed as he handed me the papers, like he couldn't quite believe someone was being sued for water theft when there was a well pump sitting in plain sight. After his car disappeared down the road, I opened the envelope and read what turned out to be the most absurd legal document of my life. They wanted $18,000 in damages for unauthorized utility usage. According to Paige Whitman and the Meadowbrook Homeowners Association, I had been secretly tapping into their system for 5 years, supposedly tunneling pipes through solid bedrock to reach their main line without anyone noticing. I actually laughed. Pipes through bedrock? What did they think I was, Tony Stark with a secret underground lab? The claim was so outrageous, I read it twice just to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. Maybe I should have taken it more seriously from the start, but really, how are you supposed to respond rationally to something this bizarre? My name's Adam Wright. I'm 36, and I work as a financial advisor. Numbers, documents, and details are my everyday life. When I bought this land 4 years ago, I chose it specifically because it was beyond HOA reach. The previous owner had already installed a private well and septic system, making the property fully independent from municipal utilities. That independence was the main reason I bought. I'd no monthly dues, no neighbors policing mailbox colors, no committee telling me how to live. And yet, here I was, holding a lawsuit filled with official-looking diagrams showing so-called pipe connections between my land and theirs. These weren't sloppy doodles either, as someone had gone to serious effort to make them appear legitimate, complete with engineering-style detail. Most HOA disputes I'd heard about were over parking spaces or fence height, not full-blown utility fraud cases backed with fabricated blueprints. Who spends this kind of time manufacturing evidence just to bully a neighbor? My coffee went cold as I studied their phony technical specs, complete with underground connections that never existed. They demanded immediate payment of the $18,000, attorney fees, plus full access to my property for inspection and verification. That last part bothered me more than the money. They wanted permission to dig up my yard, essentially destroying years of landscaping on a wild goose chase. I'd spent 3 years building the garden I loved, raised beds, fruit trees, the perfect outdoor retreat for a quiet morning. Now some HOA president thought she could send a crew to tear it all apart on the basis of fake evidence. The arrogance was staggering. I paced the property line that morning, following the markers left by the surveyor. The boundaries were clear as day. A natural creek separated my land from theirs, along with 50 yards of untouched woodland. For their story to be true, I would have had to bore tunnels under the creek, through the woods, and uphill to reach my house. The cost of such a project would have exceeded the price of my entire property. Yet they claimed I'd managed all this secretly, without leaving a single trace. It felt like being accused of building a covert tunnel to Fort Knox, but instead of stealing gold, they thought I was swiping their $12 a month chlorine-flavored water. Then I noticed something that set off alarm bells. The lawsuit included consumption calculations that were suspiciously precise: gallons per day, seasonal fluctuations, even estimates for irrigation and appliances. The patterns were eerily similar to my actual well usage, details no one could know unless they'd been monitoring me somehow. Normal HOA boards don't track water consumption with this kind of accuracy. Either they had inside help from utility employees, or they'd spent serious money on consultants. The logical move would have been to call my attorney, David Henderson, the same guy who handled my property purchase. He'd have sorted this out easily, but he was buried in a massive corporate merger and wouldn't be available for at least 2 weeks. Meanwhile, the HOA's lawsuit demanded a response within 10 days. Waiting around wasn't an option. Sometimes, when accusations are this absurd, you've got no choice but to fight back yourself. Any rational person should have seen right through their claims. At least, that is what I kept telling myself while making what may have been the biggest mistake of my life. I decided to represent myself, at least for the initial response. How difficult could it really be to prove I wasn't tied into their water system? I had the original inspection report verifying my independent utilities. I had county records showing my well permit and septic installation. Most importantly, I had 4 years of water bills reflecting 0 municipal usage. The evidence was stacked in my favor, and I believed the truth would speak for itself in any courtroom. My father always told me, honest people have nothing to hide, and liars eventually expose themselves. I couldn't decide if I was being foolishly optimistic or simply naive. Macron v. But it felt like an open and shut case. Yet as I sat on my deck rereading the accusations, staring at the fabricated consumption reports, a nagging doubt crept in. What if they had found a way to manufacture connections? What if this went beyond a misunderstanding? The sheer amount of work put into the lawsuit suggested this wasn't just a fishing expedition for a quick payout. They either truly believed they had evidence, or they knew something I didn't. That thought unsettled me more than anything else. Fear and uncertainty can make even innocent people consider paying settlements, simply to avoid the misery of a drawn-out fight. And by nightfall, Paige Whitman and her board would be standing in front of the entire neighborhood, parading me as a thief. I had no idea if I was about to call their bluff or step willingly into the opening act of my own public humiliation. The Meadowbrook clubhouse was overflowing that evening. I had never seen so many residents at a meeting. Word of the water thief had clearly spread, and people were eager to witness the spectacle. The room, meant for 30, was crammed with 50 residents, extra folding chairs squeezed into every corner. Others pressed shoulder to shoulder along the walls. The air carried a tension that was hostile before anyone had said a word. I slipped into a seat in the back, hoping to quietly observe and piece together Paige's true intentions. Looking back, I should have known better. Walking into that room was like stepping directly into an ambush. Paige Whitman dominated the gathering as if she had trained her whole life for it. At 53, with styled blonde hair and a sharp business suit that screamed authority, she looked every inch the polished professional. She had a projector, handouts neatly distributed to every attendee, and a laser pointer she wielded like a general commanding her troops. This wasn't a spontaneous complaint session, it was a meticulously staged performance. Her goal was clear: destroy my credibility and rally the neighborhood against me. I had to admit, the preparation was impressive, even if it was malicious to its core. Her slides displayed charts of water usage and calculations showing how my supposed theft was costing each household an additional $12 per month. A woman in the third row even started live streaming the entire event, her phone capturing a flood of comments mocking, hostile, some even calling for my arrest. Paige moved through her presentation with absolute confidence, describing how she had uncovered the unauthorized connection during a routine audit. She painted me as a deceitful neighbor, secretly leeching from hard-working families for years while pretending to live off my own well. The narrative was persuasive, built on layers of fabricated detail. I could hardly believe how thorough the lies were. Every time someone raised a question, Paige had an answer ready, backed by paperwork and proof. She spoke with the righteous anger of someone utterly convinced she was defending her community, and disturbingly, the residents believed her. I watched neighbor after neighbor nodding, swayed by her story. A woman seated near the front raised her hand and asked if someone asked how such a scheme could have gone unnoticed for so many years. Paige answered without hesitation, claiming that sophisticated thieves often target homes just beyond HOA borders, where oversight and monitoring are weaker. Did she really just call me a sophisticated thief? At that moment, it hit me I had completely underestimated the level of deception I was up against. Seated beside her was Lucas Green, the home manager. He looked to be around 40, carrying the restless energy of someone who spends his life juggling complaints and community funds. Throughout her performance, He supplied Paige with documents, charts, and what looked like correspondence from utility companies supposedly proving my unauthorized usage. It was terrifying how complete their presentation was. This wasn't some half-baked accusation. They had constructed an entire file, professional-looking and polished, convincing enough to sway anyone unfamiliar with the truth. Once Paige opened the floor, the hostility turned personal. A resident questioned why I'd chosen to live so close to their community if I didn't want to contribute fairly. Another speculated that if I was stealing water, maybe I was stealing other things as well, packages, mail, even vandalizing property. One person recalled seeing me walking near their fence line and accused me of scouting for more theft. The paranoia was spreading exactly as Paige intended. I'd love to say I kept calm, but honestly, who wouldn't feel panic in that situation? I stood to defend myself and instantly regretted it. The moment I identified myself as Adam Wright, the room erupted in angry murmurs and hard stares. My heart hammered in my chest, my throat dry as I tried to explain. I had my own well, my own septic, no connection to their utilities whatsoever. But Paige had prepared for that. She flipped to new slides explaining how easy it was to disguise illegal hookups, how property owners often build decoy wells, and how utility theft had become more sophisticated than ever. Every time I gave an answer, she countered with a polished rebuttal that made me look guilty. It was like watching a masterclass in manipulation. The worst part wasn't her performance, it was the neighbors I once greeted at the grocery store now glaring at me like a criminal. Mrs. Patterson from Maple Drive demanded to know if I was the reason her water pressure was low. Mr. Rodriguez openly wondered if his high bills were partly my fault. These weren't strangers, these were people I'd known for years, and now they believed I'd stolen from them. Really? Did they honestly think I'd orchestrated some elaborate underground heist to save a few bucks on utilities? But mobs don't think rationally, they react. And I was watching reasonable people transform into an angry crowd right before my eyes. After the meeting, Lucas approached me in the parking lot. His tone was calm, almost sympathetic, as if he were doing me a favor. He suggested we could settle quietly at $2,000 now, the rest over 6 months. Plus a promise to connect to municipal utilities moving forward. No court, no drama. But his eagerness set off alarms in my head. If their evidence was truly airtight, why offer me an easy way out? Why settle for partial payment? It didn't add up. As I walked back to my car, I overheard residents whispering. Someone planned to blast the story on social media to warn other communities about utility thieves. Another suggested a petition to pressure local authorities into investigating properties near whole lines. My reputation was unraveling faster than I could hold it together. By morning, half the county would probably believe I was some master criminal running a water theft empire. One comment in particular stopped me cold as someone called me a sophisticated water bandit preying on innocent hoes. I stared at the pavement, wondering how my life had spiraled into this nightmare in a single day. But Lucas slipped up. During his settlement pitch, he'd mentioned their evidence was already prepared for court. That phrasing stuck in my mind. Evidence isn't prepared, it's discovered and documented. Unless, of course, you already know what you're going to claim before any investigation happens. That single word cracked their perfect performance. Prepared? Since when do you prepare evidence for a crime that doesn't exist? The thought echoed in my mind long after the crowd's glares followed me out the door. The next morning at 8 a.m. sharp, I walked into the county utilities office. The building felt like a fortress of fluorescent lights humming, the smell of disinfectant clinging to the air, clerks tucked behind bulletproof glass. Sarah Mitchell, the records clerk, looked up from her computer with the wariness of someone who dealt with one too many angry homeowners. I explained my situation and slid the lawsuit papers under the glass. Her eyebrows rose as she skimmed Paige's accusations. It felt less like I was requesting records and more like I was reporting a crime. I hadn't slept, replaying the meeting in my head, the humiliation, the stares, the whispered conversations branding me a thief. At first, Sarah hid behind regulations, citing privacy laws when I asked for connection maps for my property. Standard bureaucratic stonewalling. But when I showed her the diagrams claiming I was tied into Meadowbrook's system, her tone changed instantly. Apparently, Once utility fraud and legal filings come into play, staff suddenly care a lot about getting the records right. Whether it was official procedure or just her curiosity about neighborhood drama, I didn't know, but for the first time, I felt like I had a chance. She began digging through the database, cross-referencing property IDs with service records, clicking through files for nearly 15 minutes, aerial maps, installation permits, maintenance logs going back over a decade to when Meadowbrook first laid their infrastructure. All of it appeared on her monitor. The records went back 12 years, all the way to when Meadowbrook first built their utility systems. Every file told the same story. My property had never once been tied into their water line, not during construction, not later, never. The digital trail was spotless, complete with timestamps, authorization codes, and inspector signatures verifying every legitimate connection in the area. Seeing those clean records should have felt like victory, but deep down I knew things were about to get messier. That suspicion proved right when Sarah suddenly frowned and called over her supervisor. Just 3 weeks earlier, someone had uploaded a revised utility map claiming my property was linked to Meadowbrook's system. The update included authorization codes and appeared to come from Lucas Green, listed in the database as an HOA representative. But Sarah had never met Lucas, and real map revisions required in-person verification plus multiple forms of identification. In other words, this wasn't legitimate. Someone had hacked into county files or forged credentials to fabricate evidence for the lawsuit. My hands shook as Sarah showed me the screen. They had forged government records with my name on them. Her supervisor, a weary man named Frank, explained what that really meant. Falsifying utility maps wasn't just fraud, it was a federal crime. Cases like this usually drew in the FBI because tampering with water infrastructure threatened emergency systems, maintenance schedules, and even Homeland Security. Whoever altered those records wasn't just trying to scam me, they were endangering public safety. I stared at Frank, stunned. What began as an HOA dispute had just escalated into federal crime territory. Sarah printed both the original and falsified maps, complete with timestamps and seals that would carry serious weight in court. She also handed me contact details for the FBI Cybercrime Division and the State Attorney General, urging me to file reports immediately. Frank warned me that investigations like these can drag on for months, and that perpetrators often double down when they sense federal pressure closing in. The thought of escalation made my stomach tighten. As we dug further into the system, Frank uncovered more troubling evidence. Lucas Green's name had appeared on several other suspicious map edits within the past 6 months. Every case involved properties near HOA boundaries that later got hit with surprise utility disputes. This wasn't an isolated attack, it looked like part of a deliberate pattern. Another clerk quietly mentioned that at least 3 families had already paid settlements in similar cases instead of fighting back. The realization hit me hard. I wasn't their first target. Sarah pulled additional records confirming that in the last 18 months, fraudulent settlements from 7 different households had netted over $40,000. Each case followed the same blueprint of manufactured documents, staged presentations, community pressure, and the choice between paying a reasonable settlement or facing expensive litigation. It wasn't random harassment. It was a business model. No wonder their paperwork looked so professional. They'd been running this scam for a while. And now, I had proof. Walking out of the county office with a manila folder full of government-stamped evidence, I finally felt like I had some ground to stand on. Official records don't lie, and federal agencies don't take infrastructure tampering lightly. For the first time since the nightmare started, I felt confident, but then my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. Attached was a photo of me, walking into the county building that very morning. The image was crisp, shot from across the street with a camera powerful enough to catch every detail of my face. The timestamp proved I was being watched. Beneath the photo, a single message: "We know what you're doing. Stop digging or face the consequences." No name, no reply number, just a threat, clear as day. Threatening someone who had just uncovered federal-level crimes seemed like a reckless mistake. To me, it confirmed that I was dangerously close to exposing the entire scheme. I immediately screenshotted the text and forwarded it to my email so there would be a digital record for law enforcement. Fear should have been my first reaction, but instead, I was furious. The intimidation tactics only proved their desperation. If Lucas was capable of altering government records, what else had they already planted under my name? Later that afternoon, an unmarked envelope showed up in my mailbox. Inside were 3 high-resolution surveillance photographs that turned everything upside down. They clearly showed Lucas Green and 2 men in utility company uniforms digging behind Maple Drive late at night, burying PVC pipes. The pictures weren't casual snapshots, they'd been taken with professional equipment from a concealed position. You could see faces, license plates, even serial numbers on the tools that could easily be traced back to rental companies. Whoever captured those images wasn't just a bystander, they had serious resources. But that raised another unsettling question. Was someone secretly helping me, or was I being steered toward a bigger setup? The spot marked in those photos was the exact location where Page's diagrams claimed my so-called illegal hookup existed. According to their lawsuit, this was where my house supposedly tapped into Meadowbrook's main water line with advanced underground engineering. Except the photos told a different story. What I saw was nothing more than a staged construction site, a few pipes buried by hand to look convincing. It was elaborate enough to fool neighbors or casual inspectors, but any real investigator with proper tools would see through it. It was smoke and mirrors, like a movie prop designed to imitate infrastructure. I needed to confirm it myself. Borrowing a metal detector from my neighbor Jim, I headed to the site armed with a camping shovel. Jim had been nosy about why I needed it, and when I finally explained, his reaction cut deeper than I expected. Instead of sympathy, suspicion clouded his face. He muttered something about always wondering why my water pressure seemed better than everyone else's. Even friends I trusted were starting to doubt me. Poisoned by Page's carefully crafted lies, the psychological toll was crushing. Neighbors turning against me, friendships eroding, reality twisting under their narrative. Still, I pressed on. I documented the pipes with photos, marked the GPS coordinates, and logged measurements for court evidence. That's when my phone rang. It was Paige. Her voice carried that same commanding tone she had used at the home meeting, but this time there was an edge of panic beneath it. She accused me of trespassing on utility property and warned that tampering with water systems could lead to even more criminal charges. As she spoke, I could hear Lucas in the background, whispering like a stage director feeding her lines. The desperation was obvious. I hit record and captured everything: Page's frantic voice, her increasingly hollow threats, her attempt to convince me that federal monitoring equipment had been installed in the area. She even claimed I was triggering alarms that would bring authorities running, but I was standing right there, staring at the fake pipeline. No monitoring equipment, no alarms, just an empty scare tactic, improvised in real time to push me away from evidence that could unravel their entire con. Page's intimidation attempts were almost laughable in how unpolished they felt, insults to my intelligence more than genuine threats. While I was still on the phone with her, 3 men in utility uniforms appeared, claiming to represent Meadowbrook Utility Services. They insisted I stop interfering with authorized maintenance work. From a distance, their badges and vehicle decals looked official, but something about them didn't sit right. Real utility crews follow strict procedures, permits, prior notices, and county coordination. These men had none of that. Their body language betrayed aimless shifty eyes, nervous glances, stumbling over answers to basic questions. When I pressed for verification, the largest of the 3 stepped forward with aggressive intent, making it clear their plan was intimidation through numbers. I dialed the county utilities office immediately. Sarah Mitchell checked the contractor database and confirmed what I suspected. No such company existed. These men were impersonators posing as government workers, which carried heavy federal penalties. I managed to snap clear photos of their faces and license plates before they scrambled into their truck and sped off. The speed of their arrival, so soon after Page's call, left little doubt if they were tracking my movements, maybe even monitoring my phone. If Lucas could tamper with government records, tapping into cell signals wasn't far-fetched. The so-called equipment they left behind told its own story: a disconnected pressure gauge, fake monitoring devices, props designed to pass casual inspection but useless upon closer scrutiny. The craftsmanship was convincing enough to sway ordinary residents, but I could see through the illusion. They were weaponizing human psychology, betting that most people wouldn't question something that looked official. Among the discarded gear were rental tags from Morrison Tools, a local supply company. Another breadcrumb. I photographed everything and called Morrison directly. The manager, Carol, confirmed my worst suspicion. Lucas Green himself had rented the equipment, using a company credit card that was already flagged for suspicious activity. She even mentioned it wasn't the first time HOA disputes had been tied to shady rentals. The fraud was bigger than Dr. Mopsa and now stretched into identity theft, credit card abuse, and staged contractor work. Each layer revealed a more elaborate criminal enterprise than I had first imagined. Walking back to my car, I carried with me a pile of evidence: photographs of the fake setup, witness testimony of impersonators, and recordings of Paige's voice coordinating the deception in real time. For the first time, I felt I had enough to dismantle their entire operation. Then my phone buzzed. The text made my blood run cold. A photograph of my backyard, taken with telephoto equipment close enough to capture my well pump and septic system in crisp detail. They weren't just watching my investigation, they were inside my private life, trespassing on property I had always considered safe. Another message followed, accompanied by a second photo. This time, the image wasn't from across the yard, it was from inside my backyard, proof they'd already crossed into my world, erasing every boundary. The next morning, 9 a.m. sharp, I stood before the imposing federal courthouse. Marble columns, metal detectors, and silent security officers created an atmosphere designed to shrink ordinary citizens into silence. Clutching my evidence folder, I found a quiet corner to go over my notes, stomach twisting in knots. Paige arrived soon after, flanked by an entourage that screamed corporate dominance. The sharp echo of their polished shoes against the marble floor only magnified my anxiety. 3 attorneys in sleek suits carried leather briefcases, each exuding the kind of confidence born from billing $500 an hour. Behind them, Lucas followed with a rolling cart stacked high with binders and presentation gear. What had started as a neighborhood squabble was now staged as a high-stakes federal trial. Judge Robert Mason entered with a grave expression, the kind of presence that commanded silence. His reputation for fairness gave me some relief, but my lack of professional preparation weighed heavily against Paige's army of lawyers. Their opening statement was devastatingly polished. Jennifer Hayes, the lead attorney, told a seamless story of deliberate utility theft, backed by technical diagrams, usage reports, and fabricated charts. She painted me as a calculating fraud who'd manipulated loopholes to steal from hard-working families. The narrative was so refined, so convincing, that I caught myself wondering if I had missed something in my own defense. When it was finally my turn to present, I felt like a lone soldier carrying only a kitchen knife into a battlefield full of cannons. I had documents, photographs, and recordings, but no sleek presentations, no expert witnesses, no legal team. Just me, standing at the table, trying to untangle their lies with nothing but raw evidence and determination. I laid out my defense: the falsified map revisions, the staged utility setup, and the county records that proved the accusations against me were manufactured. Judge Mason listened carefully, asking the occasional pointed question about timestamps and documentation sources, but his face remained unreadable. I could feel sweat running down my back as I flipped through my stack of papers, terrified I'd miss the one page that mattered most. Then the questioning began, and that's when their polished facade began to unravel. When the judge pressed Lucas for technical specifics about utility connections, his composure cracked. He stammered, contradicted his earlier sworn statements, and failed to explain how I supposedly tunneled through solid bedrock without heavy machinery, or why no construction permits existed for the alleged underground work. Each question from Judge Mason poked another hole in their story. At one point, Lucas stumbled so badly that someone in the gallery muttered, "Liar." A ripple of laughter spread through the room. For the first time, Paige's air of absolute control faltered. Jennifer Hayes tried to redirect the focus, claiming my refusal to live within HOA boundaries showed a pattern of selfishness. She implied that someone with my background in finance could easily engineer a sophisticated fraud. But the argument felt weak. more like character assassination than evidence. Things worsened for them when Judge Mason demanded a full explanation of the technical diagrams they had submitted. Lucas admitted under questioning that he wasn't qualified to interpret engineering schematics. He said the diagrams came from a consultant, but conveniently, this expert was unavailable to testify. When pressed for credentials or contact details, Lucas tried to hide behind proprietary business data and attorney-client privilege. Did he really think a federal judge would accept anonymous diagrams with no verifiable source? When I presented Sarah Mitchell's official county record showing the falsified map revisions with timestamps and digital signature, as a panic spread across their table. Jennifer Hayes objected over and over, calling the database evidence hearsay, but the judge overruled her each time. The forged authorization codes tied directly to Lucas Green. It was undeniable. Then came the recording of Paige threatening me while I examined the fake pipes. Hearing her voice played aloud in court, her tone sharp, her words revealing insider knowledge, it was like a confession broadcast to the entire room. Jennifer Hayes argued the recording was illegal, but single-party consent laws made it perfectly admissible. For the first time, Judge Mason's expression shifted. Neutral professionalism gave way to suspicion as Paige's voice threatened me for investigating infrastructure she knew was fabricated. By the lunch recess, the cracks had widened into full-blown fractures. I overheard Paige's legal team arguing in hushed but frantic tones. Hayes pushed to withdraw the lawsuit before things got worse, while Paige stubbornly insisted they could still salvage the case with community testimony. Lucas sat pale and silent, no doubt calculating the federal prison time he was now facing. A fraud, hacking, impersonation of government officials. The once confident team looked less like professionals and more like conspirators trapped in their own scheme. That's when a county utilities officer approached me in the hallway. "We need to talk about Lucas," he said simply. His name was Mark Thompson, a veteran with 15 years of service. The uniform and security badges he wore immediately commanded respect, and Judge Mason allowed him to step forward. His lined face and trembling hands betrayed the weight of what he was about to do. Mark had taken emergency leave, risking his career, to testify about what he knew. As he raised his hand to swear the oath, his shaking fingers showed the cost of his decision. He was about to expose corruption inside his own department, and he knew the consequences. And when he began to speak, the story he told reshaped everything I thought I understood about Lucas Green's operation. It hadn't started recently. According to Mark, it began 6 months earlier. A broken bar. Lucas first approached Mark after work, presenting himself as a representative for several HOA boards. He said he needed clarification about utility boundaries near residential developments. At first, it all sounded legitimate, basic compliance and documentation questions that any community manager might reasonably ask. Mark, eager to be helpful, explained procedures for database access, map revisions, and authorization requirements. At the time, he didn't realize his answers were being collected for criminal purposes. His voice cracked slightly as he admitted in court that he felt responsible for having unknowingly armed Lucas with insider knowledge. The first attempt at bribery came disguised as consulting fees for technical expertise. Lucas offered $500 in cash for signatures that would approve revised infrastructure documents, supposedly to fix old mapping errors tied to property tax assessments. The way he framed it, it sounded like helping homeowners fight unfair taxation. Mark declined, politely, but firmly. Lucas didn't back off. Instead, his offers escalated to $1,000, then $2,000 until he openly asked for database access and falsified authorization codes. What started as consulting turned into outright corruption, almost without Mark realizing how far it had gone. When money failed, intimidation began. First came anonymous calls, warning Mark that his job was at risk if he kept asking questions. Then suspicious cars idled outside his home. The threats became personal, references to his wife's workplace, his daughter's school schedule, and their weekend family routines. The breaking point came when Mark found his car keyed outside his daughter's school, a note under the windshield wiper reading, "Stop asking questions." On the stand, Mark admitted the campaign almost worked. The stress wrecked his sleep, strained his marriage, and left him constantly afraid for his family. His wife begged him to give Lucas what he wanted, arguing that safety was more important than abstract principles about government integrity. What finally kept him from caving was his daughter. One night she asked why her daddy always looked scared. Mark realized that running would teach her to submit to bullies. Standing firm, no matter the cost, was the only way to set the right example. Mark had kept everything: emails, notes, reports. The documents showed Lucas's desperation when bribery and intimidation failed. The emails revealed a predatory operation. Lucas and Paige carefully selected victims: elderly homeowners, recent immigrants, families on fixed incomes, people unlikely to fight back or afford legal counsel. This wasn't random. It was targeted exploitation. Mark's expertise in utilities exposed how sloppy the fraud really was. Lucas's fabricated maps ignored real-world constraints like drainage patterns, soil stability, and construction requirements. The so-called illegal connections they accused me of building were structurally impossible. The scheme only worked if victims accepted settlements without questioning the evidence. Any serious investigation by an engineer would destroy the illusion. Mark also revealed that Lucas had approached other county employees with the same consulting trick, slowly escalating to bribes. 2 employees reported him immediately, refusing to engage. The pattern made it clear: Lucas wasn't freelancing, he was systematically trying to infiltrate government offices to gain long-term control over public records. Mark's decision to testify carried enormous personal risk, but his 15-year record, commendations, and documented reports of the corruption attempts gave him undeniable credibility. Judge Mason treated him with respect, a sharp contrast to the growing skepticism aimed at Paige's legal team. The courtroom could feel the shift. Mark radiated integrity. Lucas radiated guilt. Then Jennifer Hayes made a tactical blunder. During cross-examination, she tried to paint Mark as negligent, suggesting he was fabricating testimony to cover up his failure to secure the database. But Mark didn't flinch. Calmly, he explained each step he had taken to report the incidents, backed by extensive documentation. Every answer he gave only made Paige's side look weaker. Mark's calm explanation of agency procedures and reporting protocols made it clear he had followed every proper step before deciding to testify in federal court. His detailed account showed he hadn't been careless. He had tried to safeguard both his department's integrity and the public against systematic fraud. Then came the bombshell: the FBI had already been monitoring the situation, and now, Mark said, they were ready to act if I pushed forward. By the afternoon session, the courtroom was packed. Word of the explosive morning testimony had spread fast, drawing in reporters who sensed this was far bigger than a simple neighborhood dispute. The atmosphere shifted from a civil disagreement to a high-stakes criminal trial. Judge Mason repeatedly called for order as spectators crowded in, buzzing with anticipation about how Paige's team would respond to Mark Thompson's devastating revelations about database fraud and targeted victimization. I glanced around and saw several Meadowbrook residents in the gallery looking stunned, finally realizing the depths of their HOA president's corruption. Then came my final piece of evidence: Paige's threatening phone call, played aloud on the courtroom speakers. Her voice filled the chamber, echoing against the marble as she warned me about tampering with utility lines while I had been standing at Lucas's staged installation. The recording proved everything: her awareness of the fabricated evidence, her coordination with the impersonators, her attempts to scare me away from documenting their fraud. It was damning. Her voice wasn't just intimidating, it was a confession. Paige's face turned ghostly pale. Even the carefully applied makeup couldn't hide her panic. Next came the slideshow of surveillance photographs, projected across the courtroom screens. The sequence was undeniable: Lucas and his accomplices burying fake pipes under cover of night. The image as clear license plates, identifiable faces, even equipment tags to tie them directly to rental companies. The gallery gasped. Residents covered their mouths in disbelief. The evidence painted a picture of a calculated scheme, not an isolated act of harassment. But the more detail the slideshow revealed, the clearer it became how amateur their operation truly was. They had left evidence trails everywhere. Jennifer Hayes stopped objecting altogether. She simply slumped in her chair, looking defeated. Then Judge Mason turned his questions on Lucas. What followed was a dismantling so precise it felt surgical. How, the judge asked, could water have been stolen for 5 years without a single sign of excavation or construction? Where are the required permits? Where is the maintenance record for the infrastructure you claim existed? Lucas had no answers. His story unraveled with every stammer, every contradiction. Each question tightened the noose. And then the scale of their crimes became undeniable. This wasn't just about me. Mark's testimony and my evidence revealed a racket spanning years, dozens of victims, all pressured into settlements under the weight of falsified maps, fake documentation, and manufactured legal threats. What they had run was nothing short of a criminal enterprise. Hayes tried one last angle, claiming the database tampering was the work of rogue employees acting independently. But the recordings proved Page herself had coordinated with the fake utility workers, and the systematic pattern of victim selection made clear this was no accident. It was organized fraud at the whole level. Her defense collapsed. The tension in the room hit its peak when Page herself broke. As evidence piled higher, her objections ignored and her lies exposed, she snapped. Her voice rose into a shrill rant about community standards and protecting property values, until finally she shouted, "Outsiders like him drag our neighborhood down." The words echoed across the chamber, revealing the truth behind the harassment. It wasn't just about money, it was about control, discrimination, and exclusion. Her outburst revealed everything of the intent driving years of harassment against homeowners who dared to remain outside HOA control. Did she really just confess, in front of federal cameras, to targeting people based on housing choices? The courtroom erupted when Page screamed, "This neighborhood deserves protection from freeloaders who steal our resources." She jabbed her finger at me with so much venom that several spectators recoiled. Judge Mason's response cut sharper than any objection. "Mr. Wright doesn't live in your neighborhood and isn't subject to your authority." That single line dismantled the very foundation of her case. Even her expensive legal team couldn't cover for the fact that she had just admitted to manufacturing evidence and orchestrating criminal acts against someone entirely outside her jurisdiction. Her words had sealed her fate: criminal intent, discriminatory motivation, and a total disregard for the boundaries of the law. During a brief recess, Lucas's panic was obvious. He whispered frantically with his attorney about plea deals. Even as other defendants overheard, his lawyer admitted the FBI was already investigating and warned of possible RICO charges. Cooperation might reduce his sentence, but the reality was clear. What started as a civil lawsuit over an $18,000 settlement had now escalated into a federal criminal case carrying potential 20-year prison terms. Even Lucas's hardened defense lawyer looked shaken by the gravity of the charges. Judge Mason wasted no time. He dismissed the lawsuit with prejudice and ordered immediate referrals to federal law enforcement for prosecution. The list of violations was staggering: infrastructure fraud, conspiracy, civil rights violations, bribery, intimidation campaigns, and systematic data manipulation. Page and Lucas weren't looking at fines anymore. They were staring down decades in federal prison. And every accomplice would be prosecuted under conspiracy laws, treated as equally responsible. The gavel fell like thunder. FBI agents stepped forward, handcuffs gleaming under the courtroom lights. The gallery exploded in cheers as Page and Lucas were taken into custody. For the first time in days, I could breathe. The courthouse steps felt entirely different, leaving as the vindicated victor instead of the terrified defendant. Reporters swarmed outside. Local outlets wanted quotes about harassment. National ones wanted angles about HOA corruption and oversight. I declined interviews. The court record spoke louder than I ever could, and the prosecutions weren't finished yet. The irony wasn't lost on me. Just 3 days earlier, I'd been petrified of public attention. Now, reporters were treating me like a whistleblower hero who had helped expose municipal corruption. FBI agent Rebecca White found me outside. "Calm and professional," she explained how my refusal to settle had been the turning point. My evidence and testimony provided the missing pieces in a much larger investigation into HOA-linked fraud schemes across multiple counties. Federal authorities had been monitoring suspicious utility cases for months. But without a cooperating victim willing to gather documentation, they hadn't had enough for prosecution. My case changed that. In 72 hours, what started as a ridiculous lawsuit had exploded into a federal takedown. Page and Lucas were now in federal custody, facing conspiracy, fraud, bribery, and civil rights charges under color of authority. Their accomplices, including the fake utility workers and compromised government employees, would face the same conspiracy statutes. The consequences sent a clear national message: HOA corruption would not be tolerated, and harassment disguised as community protection would be treated as the federal crimes they were. For me, the conclusion felt almost surreal. After 3 days of psychological warfare and courtroom combat, justice had landed with mathematical precision. Page's screaming confession, Lucas's collapse under questioning, Jennifer Hayes's futile defense. It had all culminated in the sight of FBI agents snapping handcuffs while the gallery cheered. The ripple effect was immediate. Without Page's iron grip, the neighborhood transformed almost overnight. Residents who had been divided by paranoia and fear began working together voluntarily. Instead of surveillance and intimidation, people organized projects by consensus, free from the suffocating shadow of HOA harassment. Property values jumped immediately. Potential buyers no longer feared moving into a community known for corruption and arbitrary punishments. As for me, the $10,000 judgment for malicious prosecution was paid straight out of HOA emergency funds, a symbolic reimbursement for the stress, time, and resources I'd poured into this fight. But the real satisfaction wasn't financial. It was knowing that dozens of families were now safe from the same nightmare. The federal precedent established by this case made it far harder and far riskier for any HOA to attempt such fraud again. The money was nice, but knowing I had helped shut down a system of extortion and protected others from living through the same ordeal, that was priceless. And according to the FBI, the investigation wasn't over. They were uncovering fraud schemes that went far beyond utility theft, stretching even into property tax manipulation, a broken bar permit fraud, systematic targeting of minority homeowners for discriminatory enforcement designed to force them out of desirable neighborhoods through financial pressure. The criminal enterprise had operated as a profitable business model, extracting settlements while maintaining artificial property value inflation through exclusion of residents deemed undesirable by HOA leadership. Federal civil rights violations would add serious prison time and establish the discriminatory intent behind these harassment campaigns that violated constitutional protections. Mark Thompson received federal whistleblower protections and commendations for his courage in exposing corruption within his agency despite career risks and personal threats that had endangered his family. His testimony had been crucial in proving the systematic fraud and intimidation tactics used against government employees who refused to participate in criminal activities. The county utilities department implemented new security protocols and oversight procedures, ensuring that future database manipulation would be detected immediately and reported to federal authorities. Mark had risked his career and family's safety to do the right thing. Thankfully, this time, the system rewarded him instead of punishing his courage. The victory garden around my well pump felt like the perfect symbolic conclusion to a 72-hour legal war that had tested everything I believed about justice and standing up for principles. Each stone I placed commemorated values defended against systematic harassment and criminal intimidation designed to force submission through manufactured legal threats. The garden became a daily reminder that standing up to bullies and defending property rights was worth the temporary stress and uncertainty of fighting back against overwhelming opposition with endless resources and government connections. 6 months later, my morning ritual of drinking clean, well water on the deck carried a deeper satisfaction. Every drop reminded me that 3 days of courage had protected more families than I would probably ever meet. That 200-foot well carved through honest bedrock became more than a utility. It was proof that independence can survive even the dirtiest attempts at fraud and intimidation. And when I let that sink in, I realized this fight had never really been about water. It was about dignity. Maybe the real lesson here is that the truth doesn't just defend itself, you have to stand up for it. If you're still here, drop a comment and let me know what you think. And if you want to support the channel, you can always tap that little thanks button below. Stay grounded, stay stubborn, and don't let anyone else write your ending. Appreciate you sticking with us at Anadramanest. Hit that bell so you never miss a moment because things only get crazier from here.